Welcome to the deep dive. Tonight, we're stepping away from the standard history class version of events. We're heading into the shadows, looking for the truth hidden beneath the French Revolution. If you've ever felt that story was just a bit too neat, too simple, then you're in the right place. We're talking about a meticulously planned demolition job on the French monarchy. Forget the usual narratives. Think personal revenge. Think revolutionary occultism. Think engineered chaos. This might just be the blueprint for how it's still done today.
Absolutely. What we're looking at tonight, based on the files we've dug into, wasn't some spontaneous uprising of the hungry masses.
Yeah.
It feels much more like deliberate manufactured chaos. The sources really argue that the whole collapse of the old regime was a coordinated plot. You've got elite vengeance, character assassination, definitely some occult manipulation, and, well, engineered scarcity, staged panic.
It really sounds like the playbook for modern revolution, doesn't it? And our job tonight is to kind of reverse engineer it. We've pulled out 3 key truths from the material that honestly change everything.
Okay, first, the real motive. We're going to pin down the actual personal, almost petty reason, the main plotter. A prince,
Right.
no less wanted the queen utterly destroyed. It wasn't ideology, not really. Second, the mystical side. We need to talk about this secret society and the infamous magician Cagliostro, how he basically took over the mind of a powerful cardinal, using him like a puppet.
Right, a puppet in the highest circles. And third, the mechanics. How do they actually do it? How do you fake a famine? How do you weaponize mobs using specific symbols and paid thugs? This is the nuts and bolts of fixing the game. Okay, before we descend into the Palais Royale's plotting rooms, just a reminder, you can follow our live analysis and threads for this whole series over on X. Just find @officialurbranus. Right, let's get started.
So the epicenter, really, the ground zero for this conspiracy, has to be the Palais Royale, this massive, rich complex. It was the personal domain of Philippe d'Orléans, the one who later called himself Égalité. The sources are pretty blunt. They positioned him as the #1 conspirator. And his motivation, not some grand Republican ideal. It was pure personal spite aimed squarely at Marie Antoinette.
It still sounds incredible, doesn't it, that something so huge, the French Revolution, could boil down to a personal grudge. But I guess at Versailles, a snub wasn't just awkward, it was politically dangerous. What exactly did she do to him?
Well, it was a whole series of things, really. Rejections, public humiliations. But the core of it, the thing that really set him off, seems to have been her flat-out rejection of his infamous lovemaking. Orléans and his crowd, they were known for being, let's say, licentious. They kind of expected the new queen to play the game, maybe have mistresses influence policy. But Marie Antoinette, she apparently despised that whole faction.
And there was a specific incident, wasn't there, with Biron?
Yeah, Madame Campan writes about it. Biron, one of Orléans' circle, apparently made some inappropriate advance or comment. The queen just shut him down coldly. The source says she just said, "Sortez, monsieur." Get out, sir.
Wow, get out, sir. In that context, that's not just ending a conversation, that's ending a career at court, basically. Talk about fuel for revenge.
It's total annihilation in that world.
Yeah.
But it got worse. It went beyond just social snubbing to actual political blocking. The queen stopped the marriage of Orléans' daughter to the Duc d'Angoulême. That marriage was a big deal for Orléans politically, a way to get his family closer to the direct royal line. When Marie Antoinette vetoed it, it was a clear message. She didn't trust him, didn't respect him at all. So that double blow, the personal and the political, that seems to be what locked in his goal. Total ruin for the queen, and by extension, the whole system she represented.
Okay, so he's got the motive, he's got the immense wealth from the Palais Royale, but one guy can't overthrow a kingdom alone. He needed a team, right? A network.
Oh, absolutely. And he built one, operating right out of the Palais Royale like a shadow government. His key people were, well, a mix. You had Mirabeau, brilliant speaker, but notoriously corrupt. You had the Duc de Biron, obviously still furious about being told to get out. The Marquis de Sillery. And then, critically, there was Laclos.
Laclos, the guy who wrote Dangerous Liaisons.
The very same. And it's almost chilling how he just shifted from writing about manipulating people in salons to actually doing it in politics. The sources describe him like a spider spinning this almost invisible network of intrigue. And this wasn't just local stuff. This network reached across France, into Holland, England, even Germany. The planning, the sheer organization involved here, it was apparently quite unprecedented.
And they were careful. There are mentions of secret meetings, right, at Montrouge.
Yes, Biron owned a place in Montrouge, just outside Paris. They met there at night, supposedly to finalize the really sensitive stuff.
Night meetings at a private estate. That definitely sounds like Conspiracy 101. What do we actually know about what went on there?
That's the thing. Almost nothing. The sources explicitly state that about these nocturnal confabulations, basically nothing transpired either for contemporaries or for posterity. That level of secrecy is itself a huge red flag. It means they had ironclad loyalty oaths, or maybe evidence was deliberately scrubbed later. When powerful nobles gather secretly to plot, regicide, and all records vanish, that tells you something about the stakes and the control they had.
Okay, so Montrouge was the secure location, Orléans the bankroller. But where did the actual idea for total overthrow come from? The ideology for this bouleversement, as they called it.
That's the next layer down. It connects the personal revenge plot to a much wider, more radical movement. That's where French Freemasonry comes in.
Right, so beyond the Enlightenment thinkers everyone knows, like Voltaire or Diderot, there was this organized structure pushing for revolution.
Exactly. The Grand Orient Lodge, founded in 1772. And guess who was its Grand Master? The Duc de Chartres, who was, of course, Orléans himself. This lodge was described as the bitter enemy of the Grand Lodge of England. This wasn't just some minor disagreement. The English lodges were generally pretty conservative, loyal to the crown, but the Grand Orient, under Orléans, became this engine for radical anti-monarchy ideas. They were key in spreading those ideas, particularly through things like the encyclopedia.
Wait, the encyclopedia? I thought that was just like a big encyclopedia. How is that weaponized?
Well, think about it. By gathering and presenting all this knowledge completely outside the traditional authority of the church or the king, it subtly undermined their legitimacy. It offered this rational, secular worldview. The Grand Orient used its network to push the encyclopedia and its ideas into influential circles. It was basically preparing the intellectual ground, making the idea of overthrowing the old order seem logical, even necessary.
And this French movement wasn't isolated, was it? There was influence from Germany, Illuminism.
Yes, and that's where it gets arguably even more hardcore. Adam Weishaupt's Illuminati. They weren't just philosophers. They had a concrete goal. Abolish Christianity, abolish the existing political order. It was like a proto-communist globalist vision, way ahead of its time. And they had this core principle, which is pretty chilling. The end sanctifies the means. This wasn't just talk. It meant they believed any action, lies, treason, sabotage, even murder was justified if it served the order's final goal.
The end justifies the means. That's terrifying when you're talking about dismantling nations. Is there actual evidence that the really big goal, killing the king, was planned way ahead of time, not just something that happened in the heat of the moment?
There is. And this is where the timeline really diverges from the standard history. There's testimony from the Graf von Hallgritz. He was a big deal in Prussian lodges.
Yeah.
Decades later, he stated flatly that the drama begun in 1787, the French Revolution, Regicide with all its horrors,
Yeah.
had not only been resolved on at the Congress of Wilhelmsbad, but was the result of associations and oaths.
Resolved on. At Wilhelmsbad. When was that? And why wait if the decision was made?
Wilhelmsbad was way back in 1782. It was this massive gathering of European Masons, occult groups, you name it. And it was apparently where Weishaupt Illuminati really managed to infiltrate and influence the wider Masonic network. According to Hallgritz, by 1787, the plan for regicide in France had moved beyond just talk. It was formalized. Specific associations and oaths were in place to make sure it happened. As for why they waited, preparation. They needed the propaganda machine fully operational, think Laclos, Goldsmith. They needed Orléans' money flowing. And crucially, they needed to create the right conditions on the ground, the chaos, the engineered famine to provide the cover and the muscle. It was a long game.
Okay, so if Orléans, the producer, the Illuminati wrote the script, they still needed actors who could get backstage, right? Someone to target the queen directly, someone who could operate right inside the court and the church. Which brings us to Cagliostro.
Exactly. Cagliostro. Joseph Balsamo, originally. This guy was a phenomenon across Europe. Magician, alchemist, healer, whatever you want to call him. But his arrival in France, according to these sources, wasn't just chance. It was strategic. His mission was apparently very specific, to work so as to turn Freemasonry in the direction of Weishaupt's aims, basically radicalize the lodges even further and use his unique skills to control key people, his prime target, Cardinal de Rohan.
Rohan, the Grand Almoner of France, desperate to get back into the Queen's good graces. He was the perfect mark, wasn't he? How did Cagliostro get such a grip on him? Was it just flattery or something deeper?
It seems much deeper. Rohan became totally dependent on him. His own secretary, the Abbé Georges, said the cardinal basically had no will apart from that of Cagliostro. It sounds like total psychological capture. Cagliostro used Rohan's own ambitions, spiritual and worldly, against him. He set up this Egyptian lodge, running these nightly seances. They weren't just fortune-telling. The sources say he invoked the angel of light and the spirit of darkness.
Wow, intense stuff.
Very theatrical, very manipulative. He created this whole environment where Rohan believed Cagliostro was genuinely channeling supernatural powers. And it was through these sessions that Cagliostro planted the key idea. He prophesied that Rohan's supposed secret correspondence with the Queen, which Cagliostro himself was faking through an intermediary, Madame de la Motte would elevate Rohan to the absolute pinnacle of royal favor. Rohan wanted it so badly, he bought it completely.
So Cagliostro sets the psychological trap. Then the conspirators needed something concrete, something public to trash the Queen's reputation. Enter the affair of the necklace, November 1784.
Perfect timing. Perfect scandal. It was incredibly messy, involved a ridiculously expensive diamond necklace, 1.6 million livres, and made the Queen look extravagant and deceitful. Played right into the existing anti-Marie Antoinette propaganda.
And the details around the necklace itself raise questions, don't they? The diamond merchants, Boehmer and Bassange.
Right? These guys weren't amateurs. They were top dealers. Part of this tight-knit confraternity of jewelers, many connected through Jewish networks. They knew diamonds. Yet after this supposedly massive necklace is sold to the Queen via Rohan and La Motte, suddenly individual, very large, very identifiable stones from that necklace start popping up for sale around Paris. Other dealers are hawking them, but Boehmer and Bassange, they do nothing.
Why? If they thought they'd sold it to the Queen and then saw it being broken up, why wouldn't they immediately raise hell, or at least go to the Queen and ask for payment?
Exactly. They delayed for months. Even when Rohan apparently urged them to get their money from the Queen, they avoided her. This silence, this inaction, it gave the scandal time to fester and spread. It bought the conspirators crucial time.
And then the trial itself. It seems like the ultimate act of misdirection. La Motte, the main con artist, even hinted Cagliostro was involved. But nothing stuck to him. Why?
Because according to the sources, he couldn't be touched. By this point, Freemasonry in Paris was just far too powerful for the question of Masonic intrigues to be raised publicly in court. Cagliostro, clearly linked through Rohan, had institutional protection. The legal system was effectively compromised. This whole mystery of iniquity, as one source calls it, was locked down by the most sacred oaths. Even later, when some of the conspirators fell out, they kept silent about the deeper plot. Cagliostro's Egyptian lodge and the wider Masonic network, they protected their own.
It wasn't about justice. It was about shielding the revolutionary machine. Okay, let's pause for our truth meter segment here. This is a pretty explosive combination. Occult control, a massive jewelry heist used for political assassination, and a systemic cover-up by secret societies. How plausible does this specific nexus of events feel based on the evidence?
Okay, weighing it up. You have the weird behavior of the jewelers, the documented psychological domination Cagliostro had over Rohan via specific occult practices, plus the explicit statements in the sources about Masonic power suppressing evidence at the trial. It's compelling.
Yeah.
Very compelling. I'd have to rate the likelihood of coordinated conspiracy and occult influence in the necklace affair as, 90% plausible.
90%. That's incredibly high. What accounts for the remaining 10% doubt? How do mainstream historians explain this away?
Well, the 10% is simply the inherent fog of history, right? Cagliostro was a known eccentric, maybe just lucky. La Motte was a grifter. A standard historical take would be complex fraud case, multiple dishonest parties. Cagliostro was a colorful side character who had powerful friends, but no grand conspiracy needed. But that explanation kind of ignores the specific testimony about the oaths, the documented secrecy of Montrouge meetings, and that prior resolution on regicide from Wilhelmsbad mentioned by Hogwitz. You need the conspiracy framework for all those pieces to actually fit together.
And the attacks on the Queen didn't stop after the necklace trial, did they? The character assassination continued relentlessly.
No, it was a long-term campaign. The sources highlight things like the fake memoirs of Lausanne, vicious stuff.
Right, those memoirs. Weren't they published much later, even though people knew they were trash?
Exactly. Napoleon himself apparently blocked their publication initially, calling them filth designed to defile her memory. He knew they were fabricated. But they eventually came out under Louis VIII, and who was behind them? The sources point to a Jew and libelist Louis Goldsmith, basically a professional propagandist, a hatchet man for hire in the press. These memoirs accuse the Queen of affairs with practically everyone, even calling her a mix of history's worst female figures. utterly baseless, according to contemporaries like William Playfair, who swore she was faithful. It just shows how central calculated slander was to the whole Orleanist strategy.
Okay, so we have the elite plotters, the ideology, the propaganda, the occult influence. But none of that matters unless you can move the masses. Which brings us to the engineered famine.
This is where the conspiracy hits the streets. Bailly, the mayor of Paris at the time, is a key witness here. He wrote that the famine right before the October 5th march on Versailles, the one that brought the king back to Paris, was fictitious, artificially created.
Fictitious. How do you fake a citywide famine? That requires messing with supply lines on a massive scale, doesn't it?
It does. And according to the sources, it was done through several coordinated tactics, all run by paid Orleanist agitators. First, distribution control. They deliberately created unequal division of food. How? By attacking grain convoys before they reached Paris and by secretly hoarding bread inside the city, manipulating prices.
Okay, so disrupting supply and hoarding. What else?
Then the visual chaos. They hired thugs, strong men, to literally beat up people waiting in line at bakeries, especially the weak, the elderly. This created instant riots. Visible suffering made the scarcity seem far worse and more brutal than it perhaps was. It stoked panic.
And pew fear-mongering, too, right? The poison flower story.
Well, that was particularly nasty. They spread rumors that the foreign flour, which sometimes looked or tasted a bit different, was actually poisoned by the aristocrats to kill off the poor, and people believed it. The result, an estimated 2,000 sacks of vital flour were just dumped into the Seine River. Destroyed. This act of sabotage directly created the desperation Orleans needed. People weren't just hungry, they were terrified and ready to follow anyone promising bread and safety.
So the population is primed for panic. But you still need a spark. Camille Desmoulins' famous speech on July 12th, was that really spontaneous?
The traditional story is, yes, pure patriotic outrage after the king dismissed Necker. Desmoulins warns of a looming massacre of patriots, calls for green cockades. Dramatic stuff, but eyewitness accounts paint a different picture. Montrouge, who was there, said Desmoulins just stood on a table, waved a gun, made horrible grimaces. Apparently he had a bad stutter and nobody really reacted at first. Camille himself wrote later, "In vain I tried to inflame their minds, no one would take up arms." It wasn't until a prearranged victim, a wounded man named Pepin, was displayed that the paid agitators could whip the crowd into the planned frenzy. It seems very staged.
Staged and symbolic, that seems key, especially for the bigger events like the March on Versailles in October. Jordan, you highlighted the symbolism there.
Absolutely crucial. The leaders of that march weren't just random angry citizens. They were known figures linked to Orléans like Maillard and especially Théroigne de Mercoeur. And Théroigne, she rode a black horse, wearing a scarlet riding habit and a black hat. Now, why does that specific outfit matter? Because scarlet and black, those were the registered racing colors of the Duc d'Orléans. It was like she was wearing his team jersey, a blatant signal to everyone in the know about who was really bankrolling and directing this operation.
Wow. Literally flying the flag of the conspiracy while marching on the king. And this loyalty transfer, it was real. People actually saw Orléans as their leader.
It seems so, especially among the core activists. There's that story from Versailles. King Louis VI is being kind to some of the women demonstrators. One even faints from his compassion. But as they leave, another woman shouts out, rejecting any goodwill, "Our father is the Duc d'Orléans." It shows how effectively the propaganda and the engineered crisis had shifted allegiance, at least among the key mob elements, from the king to the duke.
And the sources suggest that often the forces clashing weren't the people versus the king, but organized citizens versus something else entirely.
Exactly. The Brigands. This is a crucial, often overlooked point. Contemporary estimates put the number of professional criminals, thugs, mercenaries, bandits hired and kept on standby by the revolutionary leaders at somewhere between 20,000 and 40,000 men.
20 to 40,000, that's not a mob, that's an army of criminals.
It is. And when the ordinary citizens formed their own militia, the milice bourgeoise, it wasn't primarily to fight the king's troops who had often withdrawn anyway. It was formed to protect themselves from these brigands. This completely reframes who the people were during key events like the Bastille storming.
So the chaos was deliberately amplified by these paid agents and fueled by very specific disinformation.
Yes. Like when the king's actual troops were pulling back from Paris, agitators ran through the streets shouting it was a trick recular, pour mieux sauter, stepping back to jump better. They spread the specific lie that the troops were regrouping to launch a massive assault, burn the city down. Pure psychological warfare. It terrified ordinary people into taking up arms, unleashing the violence the plotters needed.
It's a chillingly effective template, isn't it? Create a fake crisis, spread targeted fear-mongering, use deniable thugs, deploy branded operatives. You can trace it right back here.
And you absolutely see echoes of these tactics today. Maybe not with literal racing colors, but think about engineered social panics online, coordinated media smears to destroy reputations, the use of anonymous, highly aggressive groups to dominate public space. The core Orleanist and Illuminati principle, the end, justifies the means. It just finds new tools. Create a crisis, make people desperate, then offer your radical solution, which, of course, you planned all along.
Okay, let's pull this all together. We went deep tonight, challenging that textbook narrative of the French Revolution. What are the absolute bombshells we need to take away?
Right, synthesis time. First, the driving force wasn't just popular discontent. It was significantly fueled by the calculated personal revenge of a powerful elite figure, the Duc d'Orléans, against the Queen.
Second, the endgame, Regicide, wasn't an accident of escalating chaos. It was discussed, planned, and resolved on, complete with oaths, by secret societies influenced by the Illuminati years earlier at Wilhelmsbad in 1787.
Third, mass suffering can be manufactured. The famine wasn't just bad luck, it was actively engineered through supply disruption, hoarding, targeted violence, and specific disinformation campaigns like the poisoned flower scare.
Fourth, the chaos wasn't random, it was branded. Conspirators used clear symbols, like Orléans' racing colors worn by protest leaders, signaling deliberate orchestration from the Palais Royale.
And fifth, truth can be buried. Major scandals, like the necklace affair, which could have exposed the plot, were contained because powerful networks, specifically Parisian Freemasonry, suppressed evidence and enforced silence through oaths.
It really paints a picture of history not as fate, but as a potentially rigged game. And maybe the most chilling part is that first rule Weishaupt apparently had for the Illuminati.
Yeah. He supposedly said the Illuminati fear nothing so much as being recognized under this name. Keeping the real architects and methods hidden was paramount. That silence around the French Revolution's true mechanics, the fake news, the engineered chaos, the occult strings that ensured the blueprint remained usable, undetected by most people, ready to be adapted by later groups aiming for destruction. The goal is always to make the hidden hand look like inevitable history.
Which leaves us with the big question. What other major historical turning points, sold to us as spontaneous or inevitable, might have been meticulously planned and deliberately mislabeled to protect the players behind the curtain?
That's the question to ponder.
Indeed. For the full deep dive, including all the source details on Hogwarts, Montrouge, and more, subscribe over at theofficialurban.substack.com. Join the discussion on X using hashtag #UrbanosiTruth. Let us know your thoughts. Reply to @officialurbanus. What other historical moment feels like it might have been a fixed game? We'll definitely be watching those threads.